Hey everyone, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. What happens when you find out a friend is dealing with a dungeon master for a Dungeons & Dragons game that is basically using his fetish as a way to flirt with said friend in game? Well, we're about to find out. To the post. Railroading DM and his poorly hidden, creepy slime fetish by Reddit user LazyInsect7925. I DM once a week, and I wanted the chance to play for once, so one of my players, who we'll refer to as C, invited me to play at a game store with them, so my girlfriend and I decided to go. The day comes, the game starts, and the Dungeon Master throws us into your typical tavern start. None of us know each other, and a bar fight breaks out. The Dungeon Master then proceeds to describe a 10-minute fight in the bar between two randos and a guard, never giving us any chance to talk or roll for literally anything. He just rants for 10 minutes, and suddenly the fight is over. Once it's over, he tells us that the bar has a job board that we can look at, or we can go out and explore the town. The three of us say we want to explore, and the Dungeon Master says, "Actually, never mind. You walk up to the job board." The board has 3 jobs, one to slay a dragon, one to slay a giant, and one to investigate an abandoned palace. Obviously, as low-level characters, we picked the abandoned palace. After being railroaded through the entire walk to said palace, we arrive and are told that this palace used to belong to a crazy alchemist who made slimes. We enter, and the first thing that happens is a slime crawls up my arm and begins to eat my shirt. No save, no nothing. It's just on me, trying to eat my shirt off, and there's nothing I can do about it. After telling him that I'm wearing plate, it moves to C. Dungeon Master then decides to describe in great detail about how it is a cold, pleasant sensation, as the slime thing eats her shirt off and covers her body. My girlfriend and I, desperately trying to move the story along, interrupt and ask him what happens next. He finally stops and lets us move on to the next room. The next room has 2 more slimes, who immediately try to eat our clothes again, so we decide to just turn and leave the room. C decides to split the party and continue investigating, and the Dungeon Master basically forgets about me and my girlfriend here. C avoids about 5 more slimes before making their way upstairs and finding the dead body of the alchemist, who left a note behind talking about his greatest creations. C then opens a closet and finds said greatest creations, which are 3 slimy flesh dolls, 2 that look like famous people, and 1 that looks like you. He points at C when he says this, so C shuts the closet and decides to leave the palace, but not before picking up a friendly slime and taking it with them. We leave the palace, end up on some random trail, and follow it to a wedding, which we crash. Someone dies, and we're trying to solve the mystery. 100 investigation rolls later, and awkward attempted flirts from the Dungeon Master toward C, the 3 of us are about ready to give up, when the Dungeon Master brings up the friendly slime again. The friendly slime then goes on to explain that the alchemist died of heart failure after having, quote, too much fun with his creations. After saying this, the Dungeon Master winks at C, and then explains that this is important to figure out the mystery. Yeah, no. My girlfriend and I get up and leave, and drag C with us. This then leads to a long and uncomfortable conversation with C about why everything that just happened was weird, and that we won't be coming back. C says she understands, and we go home. Honestly, I'm not sure if we were overreacting or not, but that's huge creep energy, right? I don't know what he was expecting to happen, or where it would have gone if we didn't push the story along or leave, but it creeps me out just thinking about it. Yeah, I have to agree with OP here, that is some sus crap coming from the DM. Not just the fact that the DM injected some sort of slime girl fetish into the game, but made it a point to say that one of the quote-unquote slime dolls looked like OP's friend. I think OP made the right call in getting out of there and taking their friend with them, as that just seemed like the DM's weird way of introducing his fetish into the game and trying to quote-unquote flirt with OP's friend at the same time. Like, I literally had to cringe at the part where OP said that the DM gave a wink when he said that. So yeah, no D&D is better than slime girl fetish D&D. Though hopefully, OP, their girlfriend, and their friend can find a game with a DM that isn't into monster slime girls, or at least doesn't put them in their game as a way of playing out that kink. Because hey, who am I to judge? Let's move on to the next one, where a player just can't read the room and pulls a "it's what my character would do" to the post. I became a dungeon master because of a bad experience. By Reddit user Tesla Effects. About 4 years ago, I joined an online acquaintances online homebrew campaign with 3 other players, my husband, another acquaintance, and the problem. This would be my first time playing a cleric, and I was excited. I rolled up a solid Tempest domain and collaborated with the husband on our backstory, encouraged by the dungeon master. We were the fighter and their healbot, fresh from the in-universe war, our side 1, ready to start a career as an adventuring party with our new fellow players, playing a barbarian and a warlock. We have our first session. Lore is established, the universe is cool and full of references, and the dungeon master was super relaxed with rulings. Though, could this be foreshadowing? In the second session, we confront the creature of the week, a mother chimera protecting a litter of babies. I roll a nat 1 on initiative. The dungeon master keeps saying throughout all the turns that the mother looks to be injured already and is protecting her babies. I ask on a turn if we can do an animal handling check. No, she's too upset, which is understandable. So I choose not to engage, readying myself to heal the others if needed, and feeling really awful for attacking this mama. The mother eventually goes down, and the 3 babies are left, shaking in fear. It's my turn, and the warlock, the problem player, jumps in to say that they Eldritch Blast the babies. The dungeon master allows it. One does hit, and I say, she throws herself in front of the remaining 2 and prepares to take the next blast. The warlock ended up being discouraged by the other players, and the dungeon master allowed animal handling on the babies. Even the warlock rolled. So we adopted them, and the session ends. Session 3 finds us waking up in camp after long resting. The warlock has left a note saying that they quit the party, but not before murdering the 2 baby chimeras that we had collectively tamed, and the problem player trying to introduce a new ranger character who walks into camp unannounced with the corpses, saying in the most condescending tone, "Are these yours? Who would keep these as pets?" I think I made a noise in shock, and the dungeon master responded by chuckling. I left the call 15 minutes in. The husband and the other player were still there, yelling at the problematic player, whose only response was, "That's what my character would do." We collectively quit the table that day. The dungeon master has attempted several other campaigns, but never seems to get more than a few sessions in before people stop playing. Meanwhile, I quit that server within days of that ending, upset with the available games, wanting to tell my own stories, and deeply desiring a universe where players can adopt all the monsters. I went on our own community Discord space to start my own table. My Saturday group is 3 years in, and very content with their menagerie of NPCs and creatures they adopted. TLDR, roll to adopt the cute baby monster. Problem player unalived them with the dungeon master's permission, so I quit that place and started my own game. Well, that certainly was a dick move on that player's part, and also the DM's part for letting him do that without letting the others even have a chance of rolling to notice his character killing the baby chimeras, and then just have a new character just walk in? I don't blame OP for leaving after that, and deciding that she would have a better time running her own game, which sounds like it's been going good for a while. So at least this one had a happy ending, and less chimera deaths. Now, before we move on to the next story, Luna would like to know if you could like the video and subscribe. Who could resist that face? And also, as always, if you would like to help out directly, I'll have the Ko-fi and Ko-fi links in the description. But with that, let's move on to a story about a player that let his greed get the better of him. To the post. Greedy Monk kept secretly stealing the party's loot. The Dungeon Master went along with it for a long time. By Reddit user, Alandor5. Alright, so this was a long time ago. It still kinda baffles me, and I'm not 100% sure about the specifics of how the monk managed to pull this off. I've tried to explain this as best I could. 1. Game information. It was an online game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, played primarily through voice chat. I was invited to the game by an online friend, who was friends with the Dungeon Master. The rest of the party was filled up by players who responded to the Dungeon Master's game ad. This was also a higher level campaign. I think we started at about level 8, and the Dungeon Master was generous with XP. 2. The Monk. The problem player was playing a Tabaxi Monk. He was kind of a douche, and also the type of min-maxer who would keep talking about how awesomely his character is designed, how we can't even compare, and would lord it over us from time to time. Still, his douchey tendencies were tolerable, or so we thought. For the longest time, the Dungeon Master knew better. Monk also had many thief-type skills, and kept bragging about how he's just so fast that no one could catch him. He always insisted on going everywhere first to quote-unquote scout, and sometimes just rushed into danger, with the rest of the party having to catch up to him. A few times, this got him into trouble. We had to save him, and he always whined that he should have been able to get out of it by himself whenever that happened. When we were in a town, or any kind of civilization, he'd also sometimes go off on his own. We didn't think much of it. The Dungeon Master occasionally role-played separate scenes for each player character whenever there was a need for it, and the rest of our characters also sometimes went on their own errands. Monk's character was also the typical insufferable lone wolf, so none of us really wanted to roleplay any more than necessary, and thus didn't inquire further. 3. Trouble is brewing. The trouble began when the Dungeon Master seemingly began to be very stingy with loot. It had been steadily growing worse over the course of a few sessions. Soon enough, we'd fight through a whole dungeon and see that about half the treasure chests and such would be only half full or even completely empty, as if someone pilfered them. There were also no magical items found by us for several sessions. Before that, we'd find at least one per session, even a small one that was mostly for flavor, as it was a very high magic setting. I thought the DM simply decided to be a lot more strict with loot, so I did not say anything. At one point, we were fighting an undead warlord who stole the ancestral sword of my character's family. But when we got through his castle into the treasury, the sword wasn't there, and again, half the treasure chests were empty. I thought it was simply a plot hook, and that the Dungeon Master would follow back on the sword's real whereabouts later. So despite the initial disappointment, I didn't give it much thought. The next session, we were supposed to go to some forgotten temple and retrieve some artifact from there. We went inside, and as usual, Monk went first to scout. There were no enemies inside, and as soon as we set out to follow the super fast Monk, the DM announced to us that we hear the Monk screaming in pain. The Monk seemed confused by this, and as soon as we got inside the room that the monk was in, the DM narrated that we can see a large statue of the goddess, whose temple this is. Underneath it is a large, ordnate chest, and there are some runic letters on the chest. And in front of said chest was the monk, now turned into a golden statue. Well, I guess something like that was bound to happen to the monk eventually, seeing how he was running ahead all the time. Also, who would try to open a chest like that without a detect magic, or at least an investigate, being done on the chest first? I think I have a feeling we are about to find out why all those previous chests were always empty. Monk was furious, started an argument with the dungeon master, and it got heated. They eventually took it to a private chat, and unsurprisingly, Monk was out of the game not long after. I was just mostly confused by what had just happened. 4. The Dungeon Master's Reveal. The DM then explained to us that what was written on the chest was a warning that only those blessed by the goddess can open said chest, and anyone else will be cursed. He also told us that the monk was apparently stealing from the party for the longest time, in the sense that he was looting treasure from the dungeon whenever he went ahead, and keeping some of it for himself, without telling the rest of us. At first, it was apparently small stuff, like some gold pieces here and there, or an item that looked interesting. He would then present the rest of the treasure chest's contents to the party, while keeping his hidden stash in several bags of holding he had. We were all allowed to spend starting gold on magical items, with price based on their rarity. Sometimes, he'd apparently even quote-unquote lock the treasure chest after he took what he wanted from it to make it seem like he just discovered it. He would communicate these secret actions with the DM through direct messages, and for the longest time, the DM kept indulging him. Said DM was very into the simulationist approach. He said he did not want to limit our actions too much, and just wanted to make sure that they have realistic consequences. That's the best way I can explain why the Dungeon Master kept up with it for as long as he did, as I don't really understand why myself. While I can understand a DM not wanting to limit player decisions, there has to be a point where you realize that a player is not being, well, a team player, which is probably why the Dungeon Master ultimately laid that cursed chest trap, as a way to indirectly teach this player a bit of a lesson. But I digress, so let's continue. The few sessions where we kept finding suspiciously empty chests were after he started being much less subtle with it and went overboard, taking more things than before, including some magical items the DM meant to be for a particular character that Monk could not even use. He apparently mostly sold what he looted in town, or buried it somewhere to presumably, quote, pick it up later. The DM seemed to hate Monk by that point, as he kept ranting about him and how insufferable he was, and by that point, we all agreed. Apparently, during their secret conversations, the monk kept arguing with the DM about what he's able to do without the rest of the party knowing or not, with notable quotes such as, "It's not fair. I have so much speed that I should be able to loot the whole corridor before they even get there." We got to see what was inside those bags of holding he carried, and there were still several magic items in there. One of the said items being the ancestral sword of my character's family. Yes, he stole that one too. The DM wanted to, quote, teach Monk a lesson, and that trapped chest that turned him into a golden statue was meant to be it. Per what the DM told us, it wasn't meant to be permanent. The goddess whose temple he wanted to steal from would turn him back after a few hours, and give him a chance to, quote, seek redemption somehow. But the monk left the game, so it was turned into a permanent thing. The rest of us were not that surprised, as Monk seemed to be the kind of guy to do a thing like this. The monk was also particularly insufferable the last few sessions prior, and we were overall just glad he was gone from the game, and were happy to continue without him. And the game did improve afterwards. That whole situation did leave a bitter taste in my mind though, mostly in hindsight, knowing that the DM knew about that for so long, and indulged him for so long without telling us about it. I'm not even sure how exactly he managed to keep it secret from the rest of the party. Well, he managed it because ultimately, the DM let him get away with it. And the monk wasn't the only one who had his secret plotline. I remember that the sorcerer was heir to some kingdom, which he kept secret from us, and was using the party to get strong and rich enough to help him win his throne back from the usurper. But as far as I know, he wasn't stealing from the party, nor acting against us in any other way, unlike the monk. Characters having secret plotlines or reasons to be with a party is fine in games like D&D. It actually makes for some good storytelling and some good reveals later down the line, though I would say only when it isn't negatively affecting the rest of the players. I don't want to make it seem like I'm criticizing the DM too much. He was great otherwise, but I don't think this was handled well. I wish he just had a chat with him to cut this sort of behavior sometime early on, and booted him out of the game if he continued doing it. Edit. To make something clear, we did ask questions in character when it seemed relevant, tried to investigate a bit to see if there was something fishy going on, mainly towards the end, but did not learn much, so we moved on. Our party wasn't that good at the relevant skills, except for Monk, which is why we didn't really protest when he always wanted to scout. When it came to the castle treasury and the missing sword, we did try to investigate, but there weren't any real clues left there, at least none that the DM let us find. So we ended up assuming that the sword was somehow stolen from there years ago, for all we knew. We had no real leads to follow regarding it, so put it on the back burner and focused on something else, figuring that a lead might present itself in the future. And we all had side roleplay, which wasn't anything unusual. Monk had more of it, again, not strange since he kept acting like a lone wolf, and if we didn't feel obligated to let him stay for out-of-game reasons, our characters probably wouldn't have let him remain part of the group, as he was just generally shady. I feel that part of the issue was a difference in expectations between us and the DM. There was a lot more going on in the game besides the monk stealing some of our loot. This resulted in us being much more interested in different things and focusing on them rather than the mystery of some empty treasure chests and missing loot. If it continued, then we'd likely start paying more attention to it. But after Monk went overboard with this, it didn't last long enough for us to make this our priority. Dungeon Master was fond of sprawling dungeons with multiple routes. Monsters and enemies would be scattered all about, patrolling or just living whatever life they had, and the prospective treasure could be anywhere. It wasn't just treasure chests. It could be coffins or urns, or whatever made sense too. So there was enough for the monk to grab if he explored the side passages and such. The strange thing is that I don't even remember the monk being split from our group that much. Like, we would finish a combat encounter, then loot whatever the enemies had on them. Monk generally only looted enemies that seemed like they were important or could have some cool stuff, or engage in some post-battle roleplay and such. Meanwhile, Monk would leave to quote-unquote scout as soon as the battle was over and rejoin us soon after, telling us what he found. I think that the DM was kinda lenient with him and let him accomplish more than he should be able to, probably because Monk kept whining whenever something didn't go his way. And by the time the gold statue incident happened, the DM seemed to dislike him even more than the rest of us. Yeah, personally, I feel like the DM kinda mishandled things a bit here. I mean, the moment the monk did his normal run ahead and basically hoard items that the DM put there that were meant for other characters, the DM should have had a talk with him about his behavior, not try to deal with it in-game by setting up a trap for him. And like Oopie said, If this talk wouldn't have fixed the problem, then kicking the monk out would have been an option. But in the end, the monk ended up rage quitting after that cursed chest incident, even though it was supposed to be temporary. And hindsight is 2020. Though, at least hopefully, the DM learned a lesson from this. And thankfully, it sounds like the game has gotten better since this whole debacle. So here's hoping that the game keeps going strong for OP. Though, that is all I have for you today. As always, I do appreciate all of you, and I hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.